Good evening and welcome to our sixth session of Conversation from the Capitol. This series aims to highlight the experiences of American Ismailis who have worked in local, state, and federal politics or policy. My name is Soraya Ali, and I am a member for the Ismaili Council for the Western USA as a member of Communications and Publications. Tonight, we are thrilled to be speaking with Honorable Judge Halim Danedina. He's the Justice of the California Courts of Appeals for the 2nd District, appointed to the Los Angeles Superior Court. He is the first Muslim ever to be appointed as a justice in California. Our moderator tonight is Chairman Farid Lada. He serves as a legal member for the Ismaili Council for the Western USA. Farid Lada is an immigration and national security expert, entrepreneurial, and oftentimes a public servant. He's an expert in matters involving immigration and national security, and he has successfully launched private companies. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from University of Florida and has a Juris Doctorate from Nova Southeastern University. For the last decade, he has specialized in working with domestic and international law enforcement agencies to mitigate national security risks. He currently is based in Denver, Colorado with his family. As a reminder, if you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. Lastly, it is best to view this webinar in gallery mode so that you can see both speakers at the same time. With no further ado, I will pass it over to Farid to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Surya, for the introduction. I'd also like to thank the National Council, the Communications and Publications Board, for putting this series together. The first thing I'd like to mention is you may notice Jamal Jaffer is not the host tonight, and I don't want anyone to worry about it. He kind of got a promotion. He's producing this episode, so even though he's not on camera, he is here in spirit. I'd also like to thank Justice Halim Danedina for spending his Thursday evening with us tonight, and I'd like to thank the audience as well for coming out this evening. And just a reminder, the views that we express in tonight's program are our own views and don't reflect our employers or the National Council. Okay, with that, Justice Danedina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. Justice, you have an incredible biography, an incredible history. I'm going to just jump in, and I'd like the audience to organically get to know you the way that I have in a sense. You were the Deputy District Attorney in Los Angeles for 14 years before you became Justice. Was there something during that time? Was there an event or a case that you worked on that shaped your outlook as an attorney, shaped your perspective, either in your public role or personally?
Well, one case that comes to mind, and I have to sort of qualify what I'm about to say, because when I was working at the district attorney's office, the cases that I worked on involved a good deal of violence. A lot of gang prosecutions and pretty heavy cases, especially towards the end of my career. And so I'll try to spare the very gruesome details. But there's one case that sticks with me that I had there when I was working in the gang unit. And one of the habits that I developed there is, in dealing with a lot of these murder cases, I always tried to make a point to meet the families of people who had lost family members to violence, just so I can get a real sense of what that person was like. And also, I felt like it was my responsibility as a public servant to convey to them that I was interested in the full story and not just the fact that their loved one is a statistic. And so I remember there was this one case that had a lot of media attention where a young 19-year-old girl was shot while sitting in her car with a friend right across the street from her house. And for the longest time, they were trying to figure out who had done the shooting. There were billboards up all over town. And finally, when we got enough evidence to charge some people in that case, I went over to her parents' house and I got to know them. And at one point, I remember thinking how difficult it was for me as really a stranger to sit with these people in their living room as they were kind of telling me about not only what happened that night, but just how it had affected their lives. Their daughter who was killed was their only child and was actually enrolled in college. She wasn't involved in any kind of criminal activity. And the night that she was killed, she had just gone shopping for Christmas presents. It was just before the Christmas holiday. And the presents, in fact, were still in the trunk of her car as she was sitting with her friend. And her father came home that night from watching a Laker game, actually, with some friends. And as he came home, he saw that his daughter was sitting out front in a neighborhood that was a middle-class neighborhood. In fact, she was parked adjacent to an elementary school. So it's not like she was in a very dangerous place. And he thought to himself, I should probably tell her to come inside. It's getting late. And then he had a second thought and instead decided, I'm going to go inside and change first, then I'm going to come out and get her. And as he was on his way up his stairs to his bedroom is when he heard the gunshots and raced down back to where his daughter had been parked and saw that she was shot in the head and she was already dead at that point. And as I sat there with this couple, and they were torn apart. This was telling me about this, showing me home videos of when the girl was a baby, all the way to growing up to being 19 years old. And it reminded me that in all of these cases, especially when you work in the public sector and when you work in prosecution, every one of these cases, after a while, they may seem routine because we do so many of them, but they're really not. These are life-shattering events for people. And it is important for me to remember that every time that I go into court, that each individual story and each individual family is affected so much by why they're there.
I can only imagine how it's possible to become desensitized as you see similar cases. Is it regular practice for you to meet with family after an event like this?
It was my practice. I wouldn't say it was regular. I don't think most attorneys did that because obviously you do that on your own time. And a lot of the people do live in neighborhoods that the lawyers don't really want to go to after hours. But for me, I felt like it was part of my responsibility. It was part of the service that I was providing. In particular, because what people don't always realize is crime is a very localized phenomenon, which means the victims of crime, the perpetrators, the witnesses all come from the same demographic generally, or the same socioeconomic background. And these are underserved communities typically who aren't accustomed to having representatives of the government or of law enforcement be something positive in their lives. And so I would always take the opportunity to show them that I was someone who was representing the state or representing the government who was going to be invested and would do everything that I could to make sure that they got justice, which is really the only thing that we can give to people who have been, so affected.
I have to clarify. So, in your own time, off hours, and I can only imagine how busy your regular caseload was. You took the time to go visit the family to learn more about this person.
Yeah, and that was my general practice on those very serious murder cases that I did.
And I think we may have to go back to the beginning for this. Where do you get this level of grit or this type of caring for the work that you do? Because as you mentioned, there were so many attorneys that either on the defense side, on the prosecution side, that don't necessarily take the time. Let's talk about Halim as a child. Where did this instinct come from? How was your childhood?
Well, I think it was probably, that's a good place to look, because that was how I was brought up in my family. Both of my parents worked in education and were very much invested in the lives of other people, not only just through their profession, but then also through community work. And as that example was made for myself and for my brother, I could see the importance of really demonstrating for people that you are there to make their lives better. It's part of how I understood my faith growing up. It's part of how I understood my responsibility to the community at large. And so when I started maturing and thinking about what I was going to do in school and what I was going to do for a profession, that was always my focus. I wanted to think of ways that I could affect the lives of people, regular people, in a positive way. And so to me, it just came naturally that if I was going to be a prosecutor, I was going to be that kind of prosecutor. That wasn't the only job I ever thought I was going to do. I kind of fell into that by random happenstance. But every potential career path I looked at always had that element of wanting to help people, because I think everyone deserves a certain level of respect and attention and empathy from the people around them.
So I have to ask, your parents are from East Africa. My parents are from East Africa. We may have had a similar childhood growing up. In fact, I noticed you were wearing a tie today. Can you tell me about your tie?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this a little bit before the broadcast, and I've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings and talks like this one. And generally my outfit is a button-down shirt, no tie. I actually almost never wear a tie anymore these days. And then recently I was on this platform, and my mom was watching, and she made a point of commenting to me that I look a little bit casual. And so I think she's on tonight, and so this tie is for her. I'm dressed more appropriately today.
So just to drive home this point, my mom called me and was like, "I hope you're going to wear a jacket." And I said, "Just so you know, Justice lives in Los Angeles, and I don't know anyone in Los Angeles that wears a tie on purpose." So I logged in, I saw you wearing the tie, and I quickly ran upstairs to go grab my jacket. And the first thing that I thought of was my mom, who's probably watching today. So, Mom, I'm wearing a jacket, and
I think
Justice
we're
is wearing a
covered.
tie. So tell me more about your parents. When you were younger, did they say, "Halim, we want you to be an attorney. You have certain traits," or what was that like?
Well, growing up, we didn't really have any lawyers in our family. As I mentioned, both of my parents they studied education. My mom was an early childhood educator, and my father went into school administration. And so the law example kind of came almost in jest. I remember a lot of members of my family, aunts and uncles and parents even, always talking about me, like, one day you should try to be a lawyer, before I even knew what a lawyer was. And then as I got a little bit older, I began to realize that recommendation stemmed from the fact that out of all of the kids in the family, I probably talked the most, or maybe was the most argumentative, and that was somehow part of why I should be a lawyer. And so then I just kind of accepted the fact that that's what I was going to do. Although when I went to college and I had a chance to try to pick a major and try to decide what I was going to do later on in life, I deviated from that a little bit. For a hot second, my parents recommended that I explore the possibility of being pre-med, which lasted up until my first chemistry midterm, when I decided I couldn't do it, and took that class, pass, fail, and moved on. But even since then, I changed my major 5 times as an undergraduate, not really sure what I was going to do. Finally, I ended up in law school, but with the idea of going into international law. I wanted to be maybe a diplomat or work for the State Department, because that was always sort of a passion of mine. And it was only just through random occurrences that I ended up in criminal court.
Well, let's go back a little bit. You said you majored in 5 different things. What were those majors?
So I was at one point or another a major in biology, philosophy, politics, public policy, and then finally international relations, which is where I landed in large part because that was the point where I had to declare the major and I didn't have any more time. And so that's where I ended up in international relations.
So a couple things. First is, I have this discussion with other people who are interested in pursuing a career in law. If you had to go back and do it again, is there something else you'd major in other than international relations, or did some of the other majors that you tried out, did that kind of stick or resonate with you? You mentioned philosophy.
Yeah, honestly, what I probably would do if I had a chance to do my undergraduate over again, I would have probably pursued foreign languages a little bit more seriously. I took a lot of Spanish, and in fact, I did a study abroad program where I lived in Spain for half of a year. And now looking back on it, I wish I had pursued that more and even maybe picked up another language, because once you leave school and you enter the world, you begin to realize that a lot of the things that you study may not have much practical application to your life. And learning a foreign language, I think, is so important because it expands your mind and it enables you to communicate with larger segments of the world that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And I think also languages that you speak affect how you think, and it broadens your mind. And so those are skills that I wish I had spent more time on.
Is there a language you're working on right now?
Honestly, I don't really have the time. I'm trying my best not to lose the Spanish that I have. But I remember I took an intro to Arabic class as part of my international relations major, which was challenging, but I enjoyed that. Really, honestly, there wasn't any much more thought that would go into what languages to learn other than to learn them. I mean, I think it's important that people learn any language, extra language, if they have the opportunity.
So what happens next? So you have this international relations degree, and you go to law school thinking you're going to go into international law, perhaps. And what happens next?
So in law school, I went to UCLA. Well, first, I should mention I went to Pomona College for undergrad, which is a small liberal arts school east of Los Angeles, which I really enjoyed. And then from there, I went to UCLA. So I stayed in Southern California for law school. And at the time, this would have been now the early mid 90s, UCLA did not have much of an international law program to speak of. So I didn't really have a lot of coursework that I could take in the area. And then more importantly, when it was time to apply for externships, there weren't a lot of formal connections between my school and employers that I would have been interested in. And so when my first summer rolled around, I was trying to come up with some sort of a meaningful law practice summer experience. I actually ended up doing a lot of mock interviews on campus, and a close family friend of mine had just graduated law school and had started working as a public defender in San Francisco. And so I talked to her a lot about her job, and it sounded like something that was interesting, and tried that out just sort of on a whim my first summer, and I loved it. It was just a fantastic experience because I think it appealed to this part of me that wanted to use my skills to help just ordinary people. And that's what public defenders do. Day in and day out, you're meeting with people who are of humble means, who've been accused of crimes, and trying to help them navigate kind of a scary criminal justice system. And so I loved it. I loved the attorneys I worked with. I thought the job itself I was in court. It was very enriching. And so my second summer, I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try the other side, and try prosecution and see how I like that. And I was actually offered a position that summer with the district attorney's office, but at the last second, they lost their funding. And I was faced with the prospect of working for free for a second summer in a row. And so rather than do that, I accepted an offer with the federal public defender, also in Los Angeles, that was paid. And so I kind of took that to be fate speaking to me that this is what I was meant to do. And so I just dove in with both feet. Everyone around me in law school knew that Halim wanted to be a public defender. I didn't bother interviewing for anything else. That was the plan. And so it was a good plan, actually, up until after I graduated. I passed the bar. I went in, signed up for an interview, and I think I did kind of a mediocre performance in my interview because I was not extended an offer by the public defender. And at that point, had no idea what I was going to do because that was all of my training and it was all that I thought I wanted to do. And right around that time, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, especially on this Zoom platform, the UCLA Law School's career office launched their website for the first time. So if you can imagine my dial-up modem sitting at home and my Earthlink email address, trying to figure out what job opportunities there were. And right around that time, there was an opportunity to volunteer at the district attorney's office when they had opened up an application to hire. And so I figured it was criminal court, it was close enough. And strangely, once I applied for that position, it was like they couldn't hire me fast enough. Like I was meant to have that job. So I feel like fate kept sort of steering me in different directions. And I was a district attorney before I even mentally prepared myself to do that job.
I mean, talk about serendipity almost, right? You never quite know.
No, and in fact, it's kind of interesting going from the public defender side to the district attorney side because I spent years working around attorneys who, in their mind, they could never in a million years be a prosecutor. And that was my influence. And so that was also partly in my head, but I had to work. So once I started, my first day on the job as a DA was the first time I could really start thinking about, okay, well, let's see what it's like to be a prosecutor. And as I'm on my way to court, getting ready to pick a jury.
I mean, it seems like working on the other side would have been invaluable experience.
Well, as it turns out, it did help a lot in a couple of different ways. One, it just helped me be a better prosecutor. I understood my cases from a different angle. I learned to look at them the way a defense attorney might, which I think helped me in my presentation. It helped me shore up my weaknesses. Later on, I realized that when I applied to become a judge, the opinion of prosecutors held by defense attorneys and judges carried a lot of weight with Governor Brown, the governor who appointed me. And so my experience on the public defender side meant that when I met public defenders, the people I worked with, I always had really positive relationships with them. I wasn't always on that war footing that sometimes people get in criminal court. And so a lot of defense attorneys liked working with me. And so they had really nice things to say about me when I applied.
And I'm going to pause you on that note. And I think as we continue, I'll circle back. But walk me through your career at the district attorney's office. So you started your first real job out of law school as an attorney was at the DA. Where did that lead for the next 14 years?
Yeah, so it was interesting. It was kind of once you start that job, you're on a roller coaster, and it doesn't really seem to stop because everything is so fast paced. The criminal courts in Los Angeles are packed. They have a lot of inventory. So every single day you're in court dealing with attorneys, dealing with police officers and victims and witnesses on a steady basis. The way they work in the LADA's office is they start you out with misdemeanors, drunk driving cases, petty theft, kind of lower level cases. But in short order, you advance, you do felonies, which is what I did. I spent some time in juvenile delinquency court, mostly in Compton and downtown Los Angeles, where I was assigned. And then from there, I just did regular garden variety adult felonies. And then I started a special prosecution unit, which is a gang unit, where I was only doing gang cases for almost 4 years. And so we're just talking about attempted murder case over and over and over again. Then finally, my last trial stop in the district attorney's office was a unit called Major Crimes, which was a very small, kind of like a boutique prosecution unit. There were only about 10 of us in an office of 1,000 attorneys. and we handled any cases that had a lot of media attention or cases that were particularly serious, like capital cases. Those were the ones that we got assigned. And that was basically my existence. That's all I ever thought about, was doing these trials over and over again, getting good at the craft, and then also developing that reputation. I hadn't really thought about leaving the office at all or trying to become a judge or anything. That too was another situation where it kind of, the opportunity presented itself in an unanticipated way. In large part because my last stop in the district attorney's office was in management, which was just mind-numbing and excruciating, and I felt like I wanted to die, trading the courtroom for, you know, conference rooms and meetings. And so that's when I finally decided to leave.
Well, was there an epiphany? Was there a point in time when you were like, I don't think I want to do this anymore?
Well, it was probably a combination of two things. So I love doing the trials. And in fact, right now, for the last several years, I've been teaching in law school, and I teach trial advocacy. So I teach people how to become trial lawyers. It's just a lot of fun, and I feel like I was good at it. And I remember there was a moment when, towards the latter part of my stay in major crimes, when my wife and I, we had just had our second child. And I remember he must have only been a few months old. And in the middle of the night, I was changing his diaper. It must have been like 3 a.m. And as I was doing that, my mind started racing with things I needed to do at work, you know, which detectives I needed to call and motions I needed to file and what was coming up. And I'd always been really good at compartmentalizing and not bringing work home physically. But mentally, that's a hard thing to do, because you're always, as a trial attorney, you're always sort of thinking, and you're always on. And I remember thinking to myself that if even that moment is not private because my work is invading it, then maybe I should leave it to sort of the next generation coming through to take over. So that was one moment that told me it was time to step aside. And then there was a point where almost every trial I was doing was a death penalty case, which are obviously the most serious and emotional cases you can do as a lawyer. And I had done so many of them that even those cases had started to become routine. And I remember thinking I was just about to give a closing argument in one of these cases. And I remember having this feeling of being completely 100% relaxed, not even a little bit nervous. And then I thought, that's not right. I don't think that's the right energy for someone doing such an important thing in the courtroom. And so that was another signal to me that it was probably time to try something else.
And then how does this process work? Do you wake up one morning and say, okay, today I'm going to apply for a judicial position? What does that look like?
Well, so in California, the trial courts, or we refer to them as the superior courts, those vacancies are filled either by appointment through the governor's office or by election. So they're technically elected positions. So if there's a vacant position, sometimes it goes to an election, and people will raise money and run for the seat like they would any other elective office. I wasn't really that interested in running because it's very expensive. In Los Angeles County, it can cost upwards of $150,000 to $200,000 just to make a credible run at one of those seats. So instead, I applied to the governor's office for appointment, but even that wasn't something that I had been thinking of when I was a DA. And I'll admit, I mean, it's sad to say, but when you look at opportunities around you, part of you, maybe subconsciously even, assesses those opportunities, you know, from the perspective of, can I see myself doing this thing? And when you're a lawyer, even in a place as diverse as Los Angeles, California, you look around you and you see who the judges are. And they pretty much had nothing in common with me by way of background or experience, demographically or otherwise. You know, when you picture what a judge looks like, it wasn't me, and it wasn't my experience either. And so I always just assumed I was going to stay in the district attorney's office. And then one of the higher ups in the office, actually the second in command of the DA's office, I remember came to me and pulled me aside and said, you know, have you ever thought about putting in an application to become a judge? And it was in part because of his encouragement. He helped me, and my other supervisor kind of helped me put the application together. I hadn't even opened my mind to that possibility until it was kind of forced upon me. And then the more I started thinking about it, I thought, yeah, you know what? I could do this. I bet you I'd be pretty good at it. I think I can do this. And then I started to build the confidence and get that application in. Unfortunately for me, it was a very long process, in part because the governor at the time was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he was at the end of his term. And a lot of his judicial appointments at that point were sort of the friends and family, people with influence appointments. And so once his term ended and I had not been appointed, I had to reapply. And so that kind of slowed everything down. But then when Jerry Brown was elected governor, I was one of his first appointments.
You mentioned it took a long time. How long is a long time?
So from first filing the application to receiving the phone call from the governor's office was 3 years.
That is a significant time. How did you stay motivated during that time period?
You know,
just sitting and waiting.
It's kind of, you get that practice doing trials. It's like having a jury out forever that won't return a verdict. And so after a while, you just force yourself to think about other things. And I had kind of got to the point, you know, when you're a trial attorney, you always make peace with the fact that once you've given your closing argument, you give the case to the jury, you've done everything that there is to do. Now the result is in someone else's hands. And so that's kind of how I approached the application. I had done everything that there was to do, and now it was just a question of waiting. That didn't mean that I was able to be like completely at peace with it. I was frequently kind of nervous and anxious about why is this taking so long. But I, you know, managed to kind of keep that at a low boil until I finally got the good news.
And you alluded to this earlier, when Jerry Brown comes into office and suddenly there's an opportunity that presents itself, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think his approach to how he wanted to populate the courts was in some ways helped my candidacy. He had made it his priority for 2 terms, this most recent time that he was governor, to diversifying the bench in California and making sure that the judiciary was reflective of the community. And so he, you know, if he was going to appoint a prosecutor, he was interested in the prosecutors that had a good reputation with defense attorneys. And so that was me. And he also was interested in people who were from groups that were not previously represented. And so, you know, me being a candidate, a Muslim candidate in a state that had never had a Muslim judge before, I think also helped me. He was also interested in people who were very involved in community work outside of their day job. And that was me also. I was teaching law school. I was involved in a variety of bar associations that were focused on social justice issues. And so in many ways, I was precisely the type of candidate that he was looking for, which is why I was one of his first appointments.
You mentioned you're the first Muslim judge, and perhaps he was looking for someone with more diversity, a different perspective, perhaps. How does that resonate with you when someone says Halim Danadino is the first Muslim judge in California?
Well, it's interesting because from an application standpoint, it's not something that would come up naturally in an application. And in fact, I'll confess that when I applied, I deliberately kind of kept things out of my application that spoke to my identity in that way, in large part because, you know, the application process goes through more than just the governor. There's a vetting process that involves the county bar, the state bar association, all sorts of different committees, and you never really know how people are going to react. I mean, I had received some negative treatment from people based on my background before, and so I just didn't want that to be an issue. So in the course of applying, I remember that I spoke with the sheriff of LA County who was going to endorse me. And he asked me, for the first thing he did is he said, you know, Halim, that sounds like an Arabic name. And I was a little bit taken aback because I wouldn't have expected him to know that. And I told him that it was, and he said, oh, so are you Muslim? Do you mind if I ask? And do you know if are there any other Muslims in the state who are judges right now? And so he was the one who was sort of pursuing that avenue and said, you know, if it's okay, I'd like to put in my endorsement letter to the governor that you would be the first Muslim to be appointed in the state. So I told him, yeah, sure, go ahead. If that's what you want to do, go ahead. So it wasn't really something that I advanced, but I found out later it was something that the governor thought was important. And when the press release came out, that was part of the press release that, the governor is very proud of the fact that Halim Donadina will be the first Muslim judge appointed in the state. That ended up following me, and to this day kind of still does, because for a long time I was the only Muslim judge in California, and I thought that's no good. But since that time, other Muslims have been appointed now and are judges in the state. Then when I applied for the Court of Appeal, there weren't any other Muslim Court of Appeal judges or South Asian Court of Appeal justices. So it's a lot of firsts, that accompany my candidacy with things. And so it's always something that people want to talk about or write about when they interview me. And I guess to a certain extent, depending on how you look at it, it can be off-putting. I know that my dad has mentioned before, why does everyone always want to talk about this? They don't talk about anyone else's religion. What does that have to do with anything? And I kind of take it in stride, because I feel like, one, it's what makes me interesting. It's otherwise I'm, not that interesting to interview for, CNN or PBS or whatever. But
I disagree, by the way. But.
So thank you. So someone has to be the first for anything, right? And it is, in some ways it's an honor, in some ways it's a burden, but whatever it is, it's reality. And so I feel like it's a position I've been put in. And so I want to take advantage of it and sort of lead by example where I can. So it's not anything that bothers me in that way. I actually think it's a good thing.
You would never say this, but I'm saying it. I feel as though you're a trailblazer to a certain extent. What does that term mean to you?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because I was recognized by a legal advocacy group a few years ago with a Trailblazer Award. And in trying to prepare for my acceptance of that award, I had to look up sort of the the etymology of Trailblazer and where it comes from, and because I'd used the word before, but I didn't really understand what it meant. Has nothing to do with fire, as it turns out. I thought for sure it did, but it's when someone is going in uncharted territory, the way they enable people to follow them is by blazing a trail, which the blaze there comes from the word emblazon. So usually it's carving something into a tree or into a rock, so that the next person who is coming behind will know which way to go. And so I think of the term trailblazer in that spirit, which is there's very little value in being a trailblazer unless there are people coming after you. You almost have no purpose as a trail. If you don't have followers or people following your footsteps, then you're really just a wanderer. You're not really any more than that. And so I try to focus a lot of my efforts on making sure that, sure, I might be the first of something, I don't want to be the last. And I don't want there to be too much time before there's a second, a third, a 10th, a 20th. To me, those types of pipeline issues are very important.
So for those viewers that are thinking about either going to law school, that are in law school now, or that have just started their career in law, what's some advice that you would like to impart? And just to remind everyone, you're a teacher, a professor at law schools now. You're also a teacher to new judges that are appointed. What's some advice that you have for these?
Well, I think when you are trying to chart your own path for your own future, there are two, maybe three things. Everything's always come in threes. So there are three things that I think are really important. The first one is you have to spend a lot of time having conversations with yourself, really understanding what brings you fulfillment and enrichment, because career is a long time. I imagine there's people in this audience that are young and maybe have decades ahead of them of professional and school to look forward to. So you don't want to get stuck in something that is not going to fulfill you on a regular basis. And I don't mean materially, I mean just, inside of yourself. Because, you want to wake up wanting to go to work every day. That's, I think, important. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to have some sort of clairvoyance and the future. Because I think sometimes young people put a lot of pressure on themselves to know, in some ways the way I did, what does fate want me to do? What does the universe want me to do? And always looking for signs. The fact of the matter is, there may be fate, and there may be some grand design, but we should have the humility to understand that we might not know what that is. And so really what you want to do is prepare yourself for opportunities as they arise, because it's not unusual for your career path or education path to just take these weird, unanticipated twists and turns, and you should be nimble enough to go with them. I think that's also very important. And finally, the last thing, and this I think applies as much to the legal profession as any profession, you really want to spend a lot of time and energy in investment in people. And by that, what I mean is the relationships that you build. Sometimes people, they don't like the term networking because it has some negative connotations, like, being disingenuous or schmoozing. But I'm telling you, those relationships that you form when you meet people and you develop contacts, they will serve you the rest of your career. And I feel like the more you put yourself out there, the more time you spend on developing relationships with people and fostering them and keeping them alive over time, the more that you will find it will all comes back to you. And I think that's important also, not just for your personal, benefit, but also that's how we help the community around us. At any given time, you might be a mentor to somebody else, and you might have a mentor. I've been in the legal profession now for a really long time. I sit on the Court of Appeal, and I have professional mentors, as well as people who look up to me as a mentor. And so it's really like being on a ladder. You should always have one hand up and one hand down to sort of help the next person come through. Those relationships are so crucial, because I honestly haven't met anyone who's been a success in their field that truly went at it alone. It's always through the cooperation and work of other people.
I think it's a testament, perhaps, to our community and sessions like this. Hopefully, what impact has growing up in the Muslim Ismaili community had in your success?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the things, the earliest things that I remember Maulana Hazri Imam talking about, when he first of all, he would always meet with youth, right? And always make a point to do that separate and apart from the rest of the Jamaat. And the message has been consistent since I was a child, which is our community is to serve in the role of ambassador in many ways, which means that when we go out there into the world, we are representing something more than ourselves. We're representing the rest of the Ismaili community. We're representing the Muslim community. We're representing our values. And it's why it's no surprise to me that when you look around in almost any field, you'll see Ismailis not just succeeding, but blazing these trails that you've been talking about. I think that's really important. If you feel like that is your mission, then people tend to live up to those types of expectations. So that's one thing. The other thing is also to approach your life and your faith, professional life, social life, community life, very holistically. It's all part of one thing. So the way you are in a professional context should be of the same ethic of how you are in a religious context, or how you are in a social context. It's all the same thing. My parents were very involved, and my mom in particular, in the development of the Aluma curriculum in summer camp. And the central message there is Islam and your practice of religion is a way of life. So it's not just what you do when you have your eyes closed and you're in worship. it's how you do everything. And so that has been a central belief for myself in how I've led my life through education, through my profession, and my community involvement. It's all part of the same thing.
We're talking a lot about community and the Ismaili community. If we step back and expand it to the community in Los Angeles and the certain social issues that are occurring, the inequities that are occurring in the country today, what are some of the impacts that protests and certain calls to action, either with the Black Lives Matter movement, how has that affected your role, your interpretation of what's happening in the community?
Well, it's interesting because I've spoken on this topic a lot before, and when you see all of the social upheaval that we have around us, it can lead to a couple of different reactions. One, it could make you want to just sort of put your head down and worry about yourself. I think that's counterproductive because it just shows the interconnectedness of everybody in our society. But I think people do it in part because it can be sort of depressing. You sort of feel like, everything's going down the drain, and, what is even happening? Our society is falling apart. But in some way, kind of an ironic sort of way, that type of social upheaval and movements and protests are a sign of society's health. If you lived in a country that never had any disagreement or protest against the government, it's probably not a free society. The fact that we live somewhere where you can do that, and you can mobilize, and you can throw people out of office if you think that that's what you want to happen, that type of energy is one of the key features of why living in a democracy is a good thing. And so I'm hoping that people instead will find inspiration from these types of social movements to find a way to express their own voice. And whether it's in agreement or disagreement, I just feel like the idea of being civically engaged is so crucial to us as individuals, but also as a community. I love to see all of the different areas that our community has succeeded. And I fully expect and hope that public life is also one of those areas, because it's also brought me a lot of fulfillment. And it's one key way where you can actually perform this role of ambassador that Maulana Hazar Imam has spoken about.
You mentioned fulfillment. What other avenues? You're a busy guy. You're an appellate judge. You've got a family. You have children. What do you do in your free time?
Well, it's quarantine life has kind of blended everything together. So, the work-life balance, which is something that typically I think has always been very important to me. It's part of the reason why I went into the public sector, because I knew that it would enable me to have time for my family. All of that's getting blended together right now. So it's really all family time, and I find a few minutes here or there to sneak away to do work. But when things are normal, honestly, I spend most of my time involving myself in my children's pursuits. They are very active kids. So for every sport that they've ever played, I've tried to be a coach for their team. Right now, they're really pursuing their artistic talents. My daughter attends a school of the arts. My son is, a budding young musician. And so I just throw myself into those activities. I try to take them to, concerts and musicals and expose them to things that I think will be an inspiration, because they're at this point now where they don't need me to be their coach. I'm just happy to be their fan. So I just spend myself basically as my kids' groupie.
I love it. I love it. And just real quick, speaking of musicals, can you tell us about the background screen that you're in right now?
So yes, this is the background set for the Broadway music Hamilton, which I felt like, one, is appropriate for the Conversations from the Capitol series, but also in the sense that my family, we appreciate the arts and we go to as many musicals as we can. And so it's representative of my happy place is being somewhere like that. And also because it does remind me, whenever I talk about my experience in the legal profession and in public life, it reminds me of sort of the beginnings of all of that here in the United States with the formation of the Constitution and our system of government. It helps me kind of feel rooted in that history.
And speaking of things that make you feel rooted and musicals, what other types of media are you enjoying right now? Are you reading anything interesting? Anything that you recommend?
Well, you know, I try to at any given time read things that will kind of keep me rooted in what's going on in the world, but then also take me away. And so right now I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between two books. One is by Dr. Cornel West, Race Matters, which is kind of helping me contextualize sort of a lot of the discourse around race issues in the United States right now. But then also on the other side, I was always a really big fan of the artist formerly known as Prince growing up. And so I'm reading his biography, The Beautiful Ones, which is one makes me feel nostalgic, but also it's helping me explore that other side of my interests.
That's wonderful. So what's next for you? You were appointed in 2018 to the appellate court in California. Where do you see yourself in the future?
You know, it's hard to say because I always kind of feel like there's this other parallel life in a parallel universe where I'm doing other things that I thought I might be doing, like, you know, working as a diplomat for the UN or the State Department or something. And so sometimes I fantasize about that. But if I'm being, you know, realistic about it, my path as in the legal profession has taken me from the trial court as a lawyer to a judge, now to an appellate justice, kind of running out of room. So there's not much else really to do once you're on the appellate level. In California, you have the courts of appeal, which are about 90 some odd justices, of which I'm one. The only other higher court in California is the state Supreme Court, which has 7 justices. And so I don't know if something like that would be in the cards for me later on in my career, but I do like, I really like being a judge. I think I'm good at it. And I feel like it's a contribution that I'm making to society at large that is, you know, worthy of my energies. And so I'm very happy to do that.
That's wonderful. Well, we wish you the best of luck, and it's always wonderful when you find something that you're passionate about, and you're able to make a meaningful difference on a daily basis.
Thank you.
So we have a couple minutes left in our program, and I had a few questions come through. So I will I'll see if I can pull those up momentarily. We had one question about the special gang unit that you were involved in. Is there anything that that you'd like to speak about on that regard, or anything significant about the gang situation in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that opened my eyes when I started looking at those cases was that gangs aren't really populated by people who you know, are just completely destitute and have no prospects. There's actually something about the psychology of gang membership that's a draw. It's very appealing to people because of, I think, something that's missing more emotionally or psychologically in their lives. And so a lot of people think, well, if you just had better access to jobs, you wouldn't have gangs. I don't really find that to be the case. I think we need to get at the heart of the real reason why people join these types of organizations that are devoted to violence and are so self-destructive in the inner city. It's a confounding problem. It's not one that has an easy solution, especially in light of the fact that now things are complicated by the distrust that the community has with law enforcement. And it really, you know, it's almost like being an emergency room physician. Like you get to the problem when you're way, way deep into it. and trying to find ways. You want to find ways to not have that patient on the table in the first place. And so, I think that is a problem that is deserving of more of society's interest generally.
Great. So I think that's just about all the time we have for this evening, but I'd like to thank you again for spending your Thursday evening and with us, and thank you to your family as well. I know it's always a challenge, especially during COVID times where we're all balancing work and all of this other stuff with family. So I appreciate your time and would like to thank you again. Additionally, I'm sorry, Justice.
No, I was just going to say, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you again. And with that, we'll close with a quick programming note. We have an exciting agenda set up for the next 3 sessions. Let's see. So our next session will be Ashish Hamarani, the elected school board official from Texas, and right now, as we all know, the school situation and COVID, whether schools are opening or closing, that's going to be an issue. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. We have Noshad Kermali, elected city council member in Sugar Land, Texas. Ali Morali, former White House and campaign advisor for President Obama, and Sean Husson, elected trustee, Austin Community College Board. So a really exciting couple sessions coming up in the next few months. So please stay tuned.
All right.
All right. Thank you again. Have a good night, everyone.